So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. And this translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayenic lineage. And so then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we find in these layers extremely important, because chapter 1:8 of Yeshayahu the prophet explains many situations regarding then the holy cities returning, and when the time of John was at, or Yohanan, and then the first holy city established after then the Messiah ascended. The Savior then was very smart, and he was able then to complete the spring feast. But then he gave the order to his people then to start the first holy city, and had taken them roughly 100 years for them to understand the intricacies of the holy instructions. And then the team of John then put together the Megillah, or then the writings of Hebrews, for the service of the second tabernacle services. Thus then the second menorah. The situation is, in today's world, because of the restoration period, there are so many congregations teaching yet situations related with church explanations and church teachings. For instance, the original manuscripts never are involved with church preaching. Church, they have unique understanding of the holy instructions, so as the original people, they have the original understanding of the holy instructions. The problem is there is a similitude of church preaching and congregations of the Savior or the Messiah, then teaching the same exactly thing. There are some very tiny variations that we can understand, but then these variations are very detrimental, because the original manuscripts are never teaching 1,000 years of the Savior yet coming. So the problem is there is a distinction making from a congregation to church, though then they have the principles of the Messiah, the Savior, that came to give his life, but then the originals are not the same as the teachings of the church. So then, United States has probably the most number of churches in a single country. And the distinction from congregation and the Hebraic understanding versus church understanding, there are so many of them and are so vast, and truly takes some time to get some of this information then straighten out, so then people can start thinking as per the early people involved with congregations and the teachings of the holy instructions. There is no 1,000 years of the Savior yet coming. The prophecies stating then, firstly regarding with John or Yohanan, states very plainly, and we can read very simply, because if we don't start debating and teaching these situations, then the church and the congregation, they become with absolutely no relevancy. So then, let's give an understanding as far as the 20th chapter of Revelation. And he saw then the angel that descended from heaven, having the key of the pit, and the key, obviously the great chain, in his hand. So then he seized the dragon, the old serpent, who is deceiver and Satan. So then these facets are not in order. It should be then the person or the facet the angel was involved with was the destroyer. destroyer then was placed in a pit, simply because there were no more holy cities. So indicating then 1,000 years of the Messiah was gone and 1,000 years of Nahashatan had started. So the understanding of reading these instructions gives us them clear understanding, because the congregation unfortunately is mixed up with the church preaching, and then it's becoming obviously an infernal situation of trying to teach and understand these layers based from what the prophet said, Yirmiyahu, then Ezekiel, and then Daniel. And then as we read, for instance, the Dragonic period, as far as seizing the dragon, the problem with this is there is no seizing of the dragon as far as this period of the restoration. It does have the inclusion during the time of the end, during the autumn feast, during the 490 days of the autumn feast, explains then the end of the world as then the capturing of the dragon, but it does not during the time of the restoration period. So then these situations, 1,000 years of the Messiah yet coming, and then for some reason the Creator then refurbishing this world and giving to Israel, and then 1,000 years coming, it's absolutely rubbish. It is rubbish of the worst kind. So then, reading from the Holy Instructions, then the understanding comes from the layers thereof, and each of them must be in harmony with the other. But if they are not, then these teachings, then obviously, as far as yet 1,000 years coming, it simply doesn't exist. It defeats the purpose of having a congregation on a place if does not have debate, if does not have some updates and understanding and layering teaching. If this does not take place, then it becomes non-relevant. So then, let's start reading from the Holy Instructions in the original manuscripts as per they are, and then explains those layers as far as these layers explaining, and then reading from Revelation, from Daniel, from Ezekiel, from Yirmiyahu, and understanding then the distinction of the Messiah completing, or the Savior completing the spring feast, and then the Savior explaining the autumn feast, and the facets of the Nahashatan based from times and seasons. These must be explained, and some people either they don't want to understand and they want to continue on the humdrum, the same situations as usual. And as we understand, the Prime Minister of Israel has re-elected himself yesterday, and then United States, every time Israel wants money, U.S. always gives money then to Israel. And then in turn, then the Israelites are going against Iran because of the nuclear program, because of either for electricity or for a bomb. And then the security problems then are invented more situations regarding with the security, and picking up fights with the Palestinians, and then building on areas that shouldn't. So the Prime Minister of Israel, he himself is generating more fights in order to suck the money from the United States. And the United States gives the money, and then in turn the USD then becomes higher in other countries and making an infernal of a situation for other countries. So I'm going to debate these later with more details. Please stay tuned.